Greetings and welcome back to Old Ways Rising Farm for another project video. We've been doing mostly the seasonal gardening videos here for a while, but with a nip in the air, we're getting back to some of these projects that we set down in spring, and we'll wrap them up for a winter of woodworking. Now, this tool is called a mocotaugan. We have done all of the steps up to this point on the channel. So if this is the first time that you've bumped into one of the Old Ways Rising Farm project videos, I'll put a link in the description box below to a playlist which has all of the preceding information and steps. We forged the blade together, we carved this whole handle, we worked on the wrappings together. When I made the first sinew wrapping on this, it didn't shrink up quite as much as I wanted. So I soaked it off by wrapping some wet dishcloths around it for about a day and a half, unwound it, carved a little bit more wood off, and then wrapped it up again. But you've seen everything that was there. So that little redo was off camera. Also off camera, I took a little bit of our pine pitch mastic. Again, check the playlist and you can see how we did all of this and mounted the blade with pine pitch mastic. And used it to fill in two little gaps that formed here in between the wrappings. Okay? And I did a little bit of sanding to smooth it off. I did all of that off camera. I'm not going to bore you with sanding on camera. I promise. Okay? You know how to sand. You know it's boring. You can handle that. Right? So what I want to do now is a little bit of finish work on the handle. I decided to make a set of woodworking tools that were beaver theme inspired because they're one of the first woodworkers, right? Them and the woodpecker. And so I'm going to carve a beaver tail scale pattern into this little swelling on the handle because it's kind of beaver tail shaped there. And this will show some chip carving techniques which I have not demonstrated on the channel before. So let's dig in. Now, first a little bit on layout. The scales on a beaver tail are not quite the same as the scales on a fish. The scales on a fish are, triangles. So when you're laying them out, you draw a grid of angled lines one way and then a grid of angled lines the other way, and you get diamond shape outlines into which you carve the sort of oblong triangles of fish scale. The scales on a beaver tail are sort of a weird hybrid between curved and straight. Right? So I tried in pencil. Always do this stuff in pencil first. A couple different ways of laying it out, and settled on a set of curved lines which were just curved off of straight in one way, and then the opposing curved lines in the other way. And that came out looking the best, I thought, versus just a straight grid or a diamond grid like fish scales. Okay? Now, to carve this in, the only tool we really need is this hawksbill knife. Okay? There's many brands that make this. I'm not going to sit here and endorse or denigrate any particular one. They're all good. Okay? They're all pretty good. But you do want one of these hawksbill knives. Now, the process of carving... Is this in frame, beloved? Okay. The process of carving is simple. We're going to angle the blade, not vertical, but we're going to angle it away from myself on one pass and then toward myself on the other pass, and cut out a little V of wood. Okay? Just make sure it's held securely, and you can start anywhere you want in this pattern and angle away and then towards myself. There's a little V of wood. If it doesn't pop all the way out, come back through again. What you want to avoid is ever trying to lever wood out with the tip of the blade. You will break the tip of the blade. Okay? So, there's one. And you notice I'm not trying to do the whole line at once. You can't do that. You will mess it up. Only do what you can see well from one position. Okay. And kind of come do some of these others. Cross this way. This is also your bravery test. You put all this work into a project, and now at the last step, you're going to start cutting into it. Okay. Do not cut where you can't see. And do not cut too deep. Little pieces you're leaving are fragile and can easily chip up on you. One right here is doing it. Now we can work with that when we put finish on. You want to make sure you don't go too flat and like undercut a whole bunch of this, or you'll be sad. Okay, there, that piece started to come up, so I'm going to come the other direction. It doesn't take a lot of pressure. We're not making really deep incisions. Go slow. Okay. So you can see where we're going here. I'm going to turn the camera off, make a little progress, and then we'll rejoin. Okay, so I have one whole side finished. And just a recap comment, when you're doing a curved surface like this, you can only have so much of the area being operated on at once just because of the dynamics of your hand. You don't want to overextend or you're going to slip and damage your workpiece. So now we're going to transition and do the other side, and we want to make sure that these lines match as they go across the center line so it doesn't look like you stopped right at that location. I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so to make sure that we don't have a harsh transition here, we're going to start with the knife in the area that we've already worked on, set it in the wood there, and then continue around. Okay. Again, I'm not trying to go too far. I don't want to overextend. But this is how you transition from going one direction to going the other and making sure that your line looks continuous. You start with the tip of the knife. Make sure I can see my line correctly. There we go. Start with the tip of the knife where you've already been and then cut out from there. And it will help you get a smooth transition. And you don't just do this here at the center line, but I will do the same thing here at the end of these two lines when I go all the way to the edge. So I'm going to keep going on through just like this. We're making some progress. We've done this checkering here, finished the tail, and I took a little bit of sandpaper and rubbed off the pencil smudges so it just looks a little bit cleaner. Okay. The next thing I want to do, there's two really distinctive characteristics of the beaver, right? You have that tail, and then you have his little buck teeth. So we put on the tail. Now I went and cut and carved a couple little pieces of just some beef bone. And we're going to inlay these and then do a little bit of extremely basic scrimshaw to make two little buck teeth on each side of the knife. It's not a full literal beaver, but we got his tail, we got his buck teeth. We're kind of, indicating a beaver into our blade. So what I'm going to do is, it's going to be hard to show you right now. Is this in frame, beloved? Mm-hmm. Good. I'm going to inlet this little piece of bone there on the side, okay? This is the second one. The first one I already did. Okay, so that's his first. Which way does it go? There we go. We only fit one way. There's his first little buck tooth just kind of pressed in there. Okay, let's go do the second one. So we need two additional tools. One actual tool here, a chisel, and the second additional tool is a pencil. Okay. Now, I've said this before on videos and I'll say it again, don't overthink your chisels. Right? This is a place where it's okay to save a little bit of money. Go to any hardware store, get any well-made, middle-of-the-road flat chisel, and you'll be fine. And you don't need a whole lot of sizes. I usually keep 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, and 1 inch around, somewhere around there, 3/4 inch. Get those 3 basic sizes, and you can cover a lot of territory with carving. And then you'll have saved that money for other areas when you need a specialty chisel or a specialty tool or a really good knife. Spend your money there. Feel free to save a little bit of money on chisels, but don't get absolute trash, right? Don't get the discount $5 for a set of 20 total trash chisels. You know, that's not good either. Get your decent middle of the road chisels. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to lay the tooth on, get it lined up just how I want it, and I'm going to set it right against the edge of that beaver tail pattern. I'm going to trace the outside with a pencil. Okay. This pencil is sharpened on a little bit of an angle so I can get it really close. Okay. But that line is still outside the dimensions of my little bone inlay. Okay. So what I'm going to do is resist the urge to cut right on that line. If you do, you'll end up with a hole that is too big and you'll have a big gap to fill. You're always going to have a little bit of gap. That's what wax is for. Don't worry about it. But you don't want a huge, glaringly obvious, sloppy gap. Okay? So how I'm going to make my incisions is I'm going to come, instead of putting the tip of the blade right on the line, I'm going to come in a fraction of an inch. Make a down cut there. Okay. And then the same across the grain. Down cut there. And up from where the curvature is, a down cut there. And now I'm going to come back and just stab straight in from both directions on all of those corners. And this existing cut is going to be the down cut on that side. I'm just going to take right off to that. Okay? Got to do one more corner here. Okay. Now, just like removing these pieces of wood, I'm going to do the same process. Take off a little shaving all the way around. This is very difficult to do and have you be able to see it on the camera. Okay. So now I have a stop cut all the way around that inletting groove. And notice that inletting is notably smaller than the piece I'm putting in. That is deliberate. I'm going to cut down to depth in the middle so that if I have some chattering around this edge, I will remove that when I make it out to its final size. Okay. Now, I like to cut most of the wood away with this knife. I have a lot of control with it. And this, if you haven't seen the earlier videos, this wood is elm. So it's real chattery. It doesn't, this grain doesn't play by the same rules as other woods. So you have to go slow and be patient. Okay? So I've removed the bulk of the wood in the middle. Don't worry about that high spot for right now. I'm going to come and do it again. Just to cut these lines deeper than I need them, so that my pieces come free. You don't want to ever be tempted to try and horse a piece out. You'll either split it or break your tool. Either way, you're going to be sad, and we have put way too much work into this project to end up being sad now. Okay? So I'm just going to take a little bit more out with the knife. If the piece won't come, cut it deeper. Don't horse it out. If the grain's fighting you, take a lighter cut. Okay. Now, it's time to very carefully... Is this in frame, hon? Mm-hmm. Okay. Pare down. You can see the grain's fighting me. So I'm going to turn it around. I'm using very little pressure and taking very small cuts. Okay. Some of these I know you can't see super well, some of these cuts, but I have to be able to see it, you know? So, okay, that is plenty of depth. This will sit a little proud when it's inlet, and then I will take a file and trim it to the final, final dimension, back to the piece. Mm-hmm. So it's okay if it's a little on the shallow side. I do have a high spot there I just noticed. In that corner. Doing that where you're pushing against the grain, against wood that's been weakened by the carving, is a very good way to be sad, so be very careful. Now, if you have trouble cleaning out a corner, it's okay to cut it a little too deep. Just take one of those chip carve grooves out. It'll be good. Is it a little bit deep there? Yeah. Will the glue fill it? Yeah. Okay. Now, it's time to knock this out to our final dimension. So, I'm going to put it in as far in there as I can. And now I'm going to come with the tip of the knife blade and scribe exactly where the edge of that little piece is. Okay. So there's my knife line right there. There's my knife line right there. So I got the width pretty darn close. I've got quite a bit of length to take out. But that's totally fine, because now we have all of this waste removed. And as I shave back, it will just pop free. And there's very little risk of an errant cut doing serious harm, because the wood wants to pop into that void. Just going to pry that out a little bit. Okay. Now come in here, do the same thing. Now here in the back of this, there's a wee bit of a trouble spot because the grain doesn't want to work with the direction that the chisel has to proceed in. I'll put a little bit extra cut there, and then very, very gentle chisel work. Okay. Might be a little bit too deep. Okay, we're getting very, very close. It's hitting a little bit right in the front. The sides are perfect. Just gotta move a little bit right there. Fair out that inside curve a smidgen. Okay. And we have it. Now I'm not going to press it all the way down in, because then I will never get it out to put the glue in. But you can see that is fully inlet. Okay, and just kind of show you where we're going, I'm going to carve a little groove down here. Which I just did off center here on camera, right? But we're gonna have a little groove down there, and that'll be our little pair of buck teeth. Okay, now we'll take this out. We will get everything set up for gluing, and I'll see you back in a second. Now, up to this point, this has been a full traditional build with full traditional materials. But when it comes to adhesive for putting these little decorative elements in, there is only one choice, and it's epoxy. Okay? There is no natural glue that adheres well to bone. Right? Hide glue really does not stick to it well. The pine resin will stick to it, but it's not going to be strong with kind of the horsing and reefing that we're going to do when we grind these back down to level. Right? The sugar-based glues, they shrink a lot and don't really fill gaps. So in this instance, it's just a decorative element. If you've gotten this far with full traditional materials, you can make a thing. For this little decorative element, I'm cheating. So, is what it is. So I already squeezed out a little bit of epoxy so that you wouldn't see me making the mess that I always make when I squeeze out epoxy. Get it good and mixed up. As with pretty much all epoxies, this is 1-to-1 ratio. Just out of one of these little syringes. Okay. And very characteristic to me, I have made way too much. That's okay. So we're just going to put a little bit here in this cavity. And you want to be very careful when you're doing this that you don't add too much and get all kinds of squeeze out all over the place. Because there's really no good way to clean this off of the wood surface, and it will show up in the finishing. Okay. Let's get a good covering of goop. Take our tooth, little bone tooth, and press it in strongly. Now here it can help to have something to help you. Press it in and tap it a little bit. Bone's pretty darn strong. It can take quite a bit of abuse. Okay. And the wood will compress around the edges a little bit. So a little bit of light tapping there. Totally fair. kind of as square as I can. Okay, there we go. There's number one inset. Not too much squeeze out, I'm happy with that. Number two on the back side. Same idea, get a little bit of epoxy. You could do this with the pine mastic, like I said, the same stuff we use for the blade. The problem with it is that in really thin layers, it loses heat very, very quickly, so it won't compress in. Whereas the epoxy will squish around a bit. Okay, so it's not quite as tight. I'm going to give it a little bit of a tapping. Okay. You would not want to do this with an outright hammer. You could split the bone. Bone is a little on the brittle side, but has plenty of toughness for tapping with the back of my chisel here. Okay? And we have a squeeze out free, well adhered tooth installation. Now, I did get a little bit of epoxy on the surface just from smearing with my fingers. But this is all going to get another round of sanding, so that'll come off. What we don't want is big globs here in our chip carving. Okay, but there we go. We'll have a little pair of beaver teeth there and a little pair of beaver teeth there when we get this all finished. Now, what's going to happen next, and I'm going to do quite a bit of this off camera, is I'm going to let that set up for a day. Make sure it's not tacky, it's all the way hard. And then I'm going to sand those flush and then sand the whole surface of this again. For taking these flush, I will mostly use a file just to get a nice, good, flat, flush surface. Then I'll do everything with 220, maybe a little bit finer with that. Down here, there's a couple of places where some of the fibers picked up. That's okay. You can just shave them off. Right? If one or two little fibers of the sinew pick up on you, trim them off, sand it back down, no worries. That will stop happening when we put finish on this and seal it all up nice. So there we have our little bone inlay for our little beaver buck teeth. I'm going to go ahead, let this harden up, sand it off camera, and then we'll join back together for the final finish. So we have both of those bone inlays glued in and sanded nice and flush. Okay. When I'm doing this kind of inlay, I do like to have the inlay piece be a little bit fatter than the depression that I'm going to create for it, and then sand it flush. Anytime I have the opportunity to do that, it makes getting something flush fit a whole lot easier than trying to carve a precise depth, right? Especially with something like bone that's going to have some unevenness in it anyway. It just saves you a little bit of time. Now, if you're doing flush fit hardware or something in metal, you really don't have that option, and that's okay. Then you just have an extra dimension to worry about. But when you can have an extra fat inlay and then just sand it flush, it does save you a little bit of time. Now, the next thing I want to do is to carve a little bit of a groove to demarcate the two incisors of our little beaver teeth. So we'll take a second, zoom the camera in, and I'll show you how I do that. This one is already finished, and this one will do for you. Now, the first thing we need to accomplish here is to find right in the middle of that little piece of bone inlay. So I'm going to take a ruler, and this is pretty close to 1 centimeter, so I can just very simply draw a mark at a 1/2 centimeter. And I'll do this at a couple places. Tooth is sliding on me. Okay. And then we just connect the dots and we have center line. This is one that you want to measure and not just try to eyeball that. Now, if you don't have a piece that is a nice even mark existing on your ruler, you can see if I wanted to do this with the 1/2 inch mark on this, it's way too narrow. Okay? What you can do then is tilt your ruler and then mark it 1/4 inch. Okay? So if you're finding center in something, it's not so important that you know exactly what this measurement is from here to there. It's important that that line is in the middle. So you can go up, find 2 marks on your ruler that have a clear, easy to mark center in between them, and then you just tilt your ruler to make up the extra space. It's just a little trick for center finding. You can math it out, of course, and actually measure from each edge, but you don't really need to do that. It's a very, very pleasant, accessible shortcut. Now, I'm actually going to carve a groove in this tooth, just like I did the grooves here to make the beaver tail chip carving. But this is in bone. Steel can cut bone. Steel is quite a bit harder than bone. However, it's going to very, very quickly take the edge off of whatever tool you're using. Use a cheap tool, please. Okay? This is a great opportunity to just go get the cheapest possible tool from the hardware store and save your good carving tools so that you're not constantly sharpening them. But I'm going to use this little box cutter blade in exactly the same way I would use a chip carving knife. And, actually a little more comfortable this way, I'm just going to cut down, start with a scratch, okay, deepen it a little bit, okay, and now I'm just going to kind of tilt the blade, didn't want that scratch in there. So what happens when you're doing and talking at the same time. Tilt the blade and just kind of shave down the edges of that to widen the groove. Go slow, and concentrate only on your work. It's very easy to pop off, just like that. At the end of the day, that's not going to affect us really here. Because I will just sand that off before I'm done. And now down here at the bottom, I'm just going to kind of round that off a little bit and just shave a little bit off of the corners. Is this still in view, hon? Mm-hmm. Okay. I don't want to shred my sinew, so I'm being very, very careful with this. Turn it so that you can see. This is much easier to do when you're not filming. Okay. There's our little groove. Now, I want to darken this tail section so there's a little contrast between the tail and the wood. And I want to get a little bit of an ink in there, in the groove, to accentuate the demarcation between the two little incisors. And I'm going to do that with a natural pigment here from walnuts. Okay, so this is just some walnut hull that I crushed up yesterday and put a little water in, just let it soak overnight. You can see if I just put this on some paper towel, it's got a little bit of a light pigmentation to it. It's going to darken the paper towel. I don't want this to be a huge dramatic darkening. I don't want this to be a paint. I don't want this to camouflage the wood grain. I just want a little bit more attention drawn to the fact that this is a carved surface and this is not, and make it a little bit easier to see the difference in the two incisors. Okay, so I just want a light pigmentation here, so this will be good for that, and it's a nice opportunity to show a natural pigment. I'm just going to paint it on. Then you can do this more than once. You can paint it on, and this is a little thinner than I wish it was. Okay. And if you want it a little bit darker, you can paint on a little bit more. Our roosters are enjoying their crowing this morning.
Then again, they always do.
They always do. I do want to be careful that I don't go over, especially here at the edges where there's a risk of it bleeding. Now, one thing you do have to remember when you're working with this kind of walnut stain is it will darken as it oxidizes. So the color it goes on is a little lighter than what the finished color will be when it's dry and fully oxidized. And you can see here how it's absorbing deeper into the end grain of those chip carved grooves than into the flats. That's exactly what I was hoping it would do. You do have to be patient and take your time with this sort of thing. Just looking at where I want a little darker and painting a little more on it. When you're using a water-based pigment like this, the first wetting of the wood won't absorb really well, especially on the surfaces, because really dry wood will get slightly hydrophobic and repel your pigment. But as it gets damp, it'll absorb it really nicely and then take that dark color. It's kind of like if you have a really dry washcloth or towel and you're trying to absorb a spill. It's sometimes easier to get the spill absorbed if you wet the towel and then wring it out so it's nearly dry again, and then it'll suck it right up. Same idea here. And again, this is just the simplest thing ever. It's just the holes of one walnut. I just kind of sliced it into shavings with a knife, which is why my fingers are a little stained. And then just put half covered in water there. Let it sit for a bit. Nothing fancy. Nothing complicated. Very, very simple to do. It gives you this nice earth tone, yellowish brown color that is dyeing the wood rather than painting over the wood. Okay, I think that's pretty good. There. You see how now the beaver tail section kind of pops a little bit, and that's what we wanted. We don't want a huge color difference. We don't want to paint, we just want it to pop a little bit. And I'm going to do the same thing. Just flood the middle of these teeth. Okay. Want to make sure that won't run. To darken that groove a little. And we will let that dry, and I will probably paint the groove in the teeth a couple times. I'll let this dry an hour, then I'll put another little bit in, and let this dry an hour, and then put another little bit in. Mm-hmm. Okay? I'm going to do that off camera, and then when I'm all done messing with it for the day, I'm going to let this dry overnight. Because the finish that I'm going to put on this is linseed oil. And if this is soaking wet, the linseed oil won't be able to soak in there well. Mm-hmm. So, this is all that we're going to do for the day, other than maybe once those teeth dry, I'll see if I want another coat or not. Okay. Just got a little bit on the wood over there. Don't want that. Mopped off. Okay, good. And it was going to dry overnight, and then tomorrow I'll get it back out and we will film putting the final finish on, and you'll see what it looks like. Okay, it's the next day. We have finished this all up, and we're going to put a finish on it. So this came out really nice, the darkening with the walnut mixture. It stayed in the little groove we carved into those two teeth well, and I just took a little sandpaper and polished off the top. Now, the finish that I'm going to put on this is just about a 50-50 mix of linseed oil and turpentine. The turpentine is going to help it harden just a little bit faster and help it penetrate into the wood and sinew a little bit deeper. That's what we want. We want good penetration here to seal up everything. Now, I like linseed oil finish on tools. A couple of reasons. One is I utterly hate smooth, glossy finishes when it's something that I'm going to hold in my hands. It's slippery, it's obnoxious, I hate it. Secondly, I'm really not a fan of modern plastic finishes because they never take any kind of patina. They just sit there being glossy as all get out, basically unchanging until they start to chip off. And then the only patina you get is chipped sections adjacent to not chipped sections. And I think that's ugly. So, just my personal preference. So I like these natural finishes because they will take an old-timey looking patina when they are old-timers. There we go. We have a finished mocotaugan. So, I hope that you're enjoying this. I'm going to go ahead and finish this other one. This was my prototype, and I did a little bit of a looser sinew wrap here. This was just loose pieces wrapped around and glued on. I hope that you're enjoying this, and if you are, I hope that you'll go ahead and give it a thumbs up so that YouTube knows that you're enjoying it and will show it to others. And if this is the first mocotaugan video that you've seen and you want to see how I made all of this, I'm going to go ahead and put a link to the playlist, which shows its creation, up at the top of the screen. So, I hope that you will give projects like this a try. I hope that you will explore your own tool making, and I will see you next time here at Old Ways Rising Farm.